Welcome to the next one of our celebration of faculty careers colloquia. And this is a program that we started in the last year to have senior faculty, namely full professors, present their work, talk about their careers, and potentially plan for it's supposed to happen once every 7 years, and then plan for the next 7 years. So they get a chance to have a conversation with their heads and the dean as part of this process. And so what we'll do today is Professor Sinha is going to introduce our speaker today.
You're introducing the introducer. Oh, okay.
So,
okay.
Professor Sinha.
Thank you.
But
I asked Claude to give me the privilege.
But don't take too much of my time.
So he kindly let me do that. It seems that just yesterday, John Ficker came to Purdue in 1980 January. We had many of you do not know Gene Goodson. Gene Goodson just came back from USDOT. All a year, around 79, and being the chief scientist for USDOT. As a matter of fact, he was the last chief scientist at USDOT. And he came with a lot of ideas, and we set up a transportation center. We got $1 million grant from USDOT, and also Lilly Foundation gave us a large chunk of money between Purdue and MIT to look into the future of automobile. So civil engineering was given 2 positions, 50%, and we hired John in one of those slots. So John came as a 50% for civil and 50% for IIES, which Gene used to run, and the center also to run. And also, many of you may not know, well, MIT decided to work on their money on doing library research on the future of automobile. And we decided to do something very practical like that. Very, well, I don't know, practical at that time or not, but something more applicable experiment. We started car sharing. Zipcar, you see today, we don't take credit. Zipcar was our figment of imagination at that time. We set up a cooperative here at Purdue with actual vehicles. And 3 years it ran, and I won't go through all the details because it is John Ficker is going to talk about what he did, and then you get the background. So that's where John came, and over the years he has taught a lot of courses in transportation area. He has done research with Federal Transit Administration, it used to be AMTA at the time, on transit scheduling, PT, etc. He's really a network design person, system person. He got his undergraduate in MIT, then he went back to his ROTC person, went to Army. Then after Army, he went to Carnegie Mellon because at MIT he met up with Dwight Bauman.
Yeah.
The dual mode, he was a dual mode person, automated vehicle at the time, and he went to Carnegie Mellon, so John went to Carnegie Mellon. And then he came to Purdue after finishing PhD there. So he's a system person, applies in transportation. And over the years, many things he has done in transit area, in planning, in land use transportation relationship. He has also looked into a lot of traffic engineering, a lot of technology side, using automated license plate monitoring for volume counting and travel time estimation. He also put together a poor man's driving simulator, very little money, but it works as opposed to $19 million Iowa, he spent on $35,000. So we had a room, and it still works, and we use the driving simulator. And more importantly, he did lots of work outside of Purdue. Like we do research and disseminate. dissemination by teaching. We stored by writing papers and books. He did, in addition to teaching, he also took that to implement or technology transfer. He's very active. I do not know whether people are aware or not. He chairs our county transportation committee, and all the things that we do in transportation area in this county that goes to that committee, technical committee. He has been a member of the City Bus Board of Directors for a long time, and he also does a lot of community work. And but from my point of view, he has been an outstanding colleague. That's what you want if you want a colleague and you want to go to an area, a colleague like John Ficker. And not only to myself, my family and my children, we have known John for all these years. And despite his politics, we have different in politics, we absolutely deeply fond of him. We are. And, so with that, then John tell about what does he do.
Thank you. Thank you, Kumar, for giving half of my talk already. So. First, a programming note. Tomorrow, Professor Blatchley gives his talk. That's 3:30 in room 234 Potter. So just think of my talk as a warm-up act for Chip. Okay. What did I do with the rest of my time? Let me explain that. Whoops. As Kumar said, I joined the faculty here in 1980. Sometime thereafter, my father was talking to me over the phone. He said, "Now, you're a professor. That sounds pretty neat. Tell me how many classes you teach." I said, "Well, I teach 8:30 and 10:30. He said, "But that's only 10 hours a week." I said, "No, Dad, that's 6 hours a week." And there was a pause on the other end of the line, and he said, "What do you do with the rest of your time?" So that stuck with me all these years. When I was asked to give this presentation, I thought back to that. I said, well, that sounds like a good title for this talk. Now, you being an academics, all or most of you can answer this question in a really meaningful way, and I will give you in the next 33 slides my answer to that question, because I've been asked that question again, basically. So some of you may have a great old time with the rest of your time. Some of you may think deep thoughts. I'll tell you what I've been doing. So, Claude, I didn't know it was only 7 years. I went back to second grade here to talk about this, okay? Because in my mind, it all started in second grade. My parents bought the World Book Encyclopedia for me, and like a second grade geek, I sat down and started reading it. By the time I got to the letter C, and through the letter C, I decided I wanted to be a civil engineer. And nothing has changed since. The only person who decided earlier than that is Chip's daughter, who in first grade decided to be a teacher. So I'm going to keep my eye on her, and she has to follow through on that. So we all know what civil engineers do, right? They build bridges, and nothing else. So as a second grader, I started saving those half-gallon wax milk cartons and cutting them out so they look more like this. And if any structures people are here know that you strengthen this milk carton by actually tearing away some of the material. Not really, but it looked more like a bridge, and I put in the deck and the strings for the suspension cables and so on. So I was pretty happy. Now, Karen can't believe I was so handy back then, because I don't do things like that now. I don't putter around the house that much. But I went to MIT, enjoyed the structures courses, but at the end of my time, I realized I also like transportation. The year I had all these electives I could take, I was taking political science, economy, economics, sociology, and I said, is this what a bridge builder does? No. Then as Kumar said, I went to grad school at Carnegie Mellon, and I majored in transportation. Got my master's, took the PhD qualifier, went into the Army because I owed the Army 4 years, and I came back to Carnegie Mellon in January of 1977, and the faculty was waiting for me. They said, we want you to be the TA for Professor X. I said, well, two things. I have the GI Bill. I don't need that much money. And they said, nobody wants to be this guy's TA. And you're in the Army. You can handle anything. So there's this mean-looking TA. I didn't wear the fatigues to the class, but I took over, and I protected the students from Professor X. And of course, I never liked as an undergraduate either, but by the end of the experience, I said, this teaching thing isn't so bad. So that set me on a path toward becoming a faculty member. So let me go through some of the things I teach. I teach a regular rotation of 4 courses. I've taught other ones, but the regular rotation are courses I really, to this day, enjoy. 361. Highway, we had a nice highway book written by somebody at Penn State, but Bob Whitford was teaching the other semester. We said, let's put in public transit, air transportation, freight transportation, sustainability back then. And we ended up with a set of course notes. Bob and I put those together. And eventually the wrong people found out about it, namely Prentice Hall, and we had a textbook. Now this is 10 years later. That book is really out of date. Prentice Hall would not let us put out a second edition, so we asked for our copyrights back, and we're putting together a new version of the book that'll be online in a couple months, we hope. Now in this course, we get away from just saying, here's some data, apply the equation, come up with a solution, draw a box around it. We make the students collect the data whenever possible, either going out on the streets and collect what we call primary data, or secondary data, dig it out of Census Bureau or some other government database. But my students are not the only ones who have to bear this burden. There's my daughter at age 5 sitting in the front yard with me collecting information about auto vehicle arrivals on Salisbury. So, and I think the person who took this picture was probably building a case for child abuse. That's, Karen took this picture out the window of our house. So Laurel is her name. She's at a freshman at the University of Michigan. She's majoring not in engineering, but history with a minor in German. So I didn't get the data thing to stick with her. So a year or two later, I think it was, maybe 3 years later, the highway director for the county at Tippecanoe County leaned over to me in a meeting and said, I need 2 Purdue students to put out road tubes this summer. And I said, how about 1 Purdue student and 1 high school junior? So my son, Douglas, got to work 2 summers at the county highway department putting out road tubes. It doesn't look like he's having fun out there. He majored instead in business and finance, and he's working at a trading firm now in Philadelphia. So I lost them both, but I give it my best effort. This is the semester I teach urban planning and analysis. It has a much longer name, but this is what it is. The textbook we use is written by a planner for planners, so it has exactly 0 equations in it. But it's a quantitative course, so I bring that in. I bring the quantitative methods. We also do qualitative work. So here's a case where earlier this semester I made my students do a 3-day charrette in 45 minutes, drawing a neighborhood to certain specifications, broken up into 4 teams, and that's the kind of thing we do in there. In the course of developing this course, as left to me by Professor Whitford, I'm teaching less. I talked to a guy from Oklahoma who is a real planner, and he said his students would not tolerate all the material I was throwing at my students, so I'm teaching less and less. I hope I'm teaching it better. And if we go to the trimester, I'll probably have to squeeze more out of it, 13 weeks instead of 15 weeks. A lot of projects we do with the Area Plan Commission. It's a neat course. I open up the paper more often than not and see something that's happening, like a TIF district being, or laws being passed at the state legislature, tax increment financing being affected by that. So it's neat having a course where there's things happening all the time. 2 years ago, our course students followed the demolition of the little old strip mall across from Lambert Fieldhouse, and what we see now is the construction of, I guess they're calling it Fuse. It's 4th name it's had in the time we followed it, the Fuse apartments with commercial development on the 1st floor. And more recently, in fact, this semester, our students are following the State Street master plan that's being developed to convert this into something like this. And we're following that planning process as it proceeds. The 3rd course I teach in my rotation is public mass transportation from different perspectives. I'm a member of the board of City Bus, as Kamara said, so that's a nice kind of way to plug into reality. In addition to the usual homework assignments, I have the students adopt the transit system so that when we talk about performance measures or something else, the students will say, I have to apply that to my Portland system or my Singapore system or whatever it might be. So it kind of livens things up. But again, there's data. Every 3 years, City Bus and all the systems that get money from the federal government have to do a year-long sampling of their ridership. And this year, City Bus is doing it, and they did it 3 years ago. 7 runs per week they have to sample and fill out a form like this. It's a simple form, it's tedious, but there's a lot of information you can get out of this form. So what did I do? I had my students volunteer to do this 3 years ago to help City Bus collect their data, because they actually collect more data back then. We had a project in 2005, it must have been, I think. We did a field trip down to the Clarion Healthcare Center in Indianapolis, where they had finished a $40 million people mover connecting the two healthcare campuses, 1.5 miles between them. And I said, hey, why don't we design one for our campus? So the price tag back then for a Purdue people mover was $60 million. I think it was a really good experience for the students. A lot more could be said about that, but let me move on to this one. Transportation planning, classes, homework, but the feature of the course is we actually adopt a city in Indiana and give them our very quick and dirty transportation plan or planning process for the city. And every year, silly me, I adopted a new city in Indiana, so or sometimes in the Netherlands if I just come back from sabbatical. And then I realized a couple things. One is Logansport is a great place to do an analysis. Why don't I do that? So I've done it 4 times now. Instead of having to learn a whole new urban area, stick with Logansport and alternate with something else. And if you are a planner, the first thing you will notice, I bet Samuel's noticing this, is that there are rivers that come together here and they form screen lines, which is an easy way of checking your data and how your model is replicating reality. So why not have a case like a miniature Pittsburgh here, use Logansport. Whoops, okay, here we go. And then the other model, the other urban area we use is Columbus, Indiana. Why? Because our students and I happen to be asked to help the new director of the new MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization in Columbus, when they became a planning authority down there, to help them build their model. So the students were on the ground floor watching this model get built because they were helping build the model. So we have some kind of ownership with that model, so we use that one every other time we do this modeling process. That's just a neat architectural picture. It has no transportation significance. So those are the 4 courses I teach. As Kamar said, I do a lot of things with the community. Being a member of a faculty of a large university in a small urban area, the mayor usually knows who you are. And Mayor Marjoram, shortly after she took office, I guess it was sometime after she took office, they did the one-way street thing in the village. Immediately outcry, opposition, so she appointed a 14-member panel, of which I was one, to evaluate the area. So here are the one-way streets as of a couple days ago. And it's interesting now, with the State Street Master Plan I talked about, we may go back to 2-way streets in this area, depending on how that master plan, what direction it goes. 3 years later, people are complaining about buses on Main Street, right across from the courthouse. This was our staging area for the bus transfer. All the buses would come in from their routes and exchange passengers here. People complained about that. So I was asked to do an analysis. I went to the Sportsman, the old sporting goods store at 5th and Main, asked for permission to go through their 3rd floor storage area. I scrambled around with the cameras, set them up on the balcony, and did my analysis starting with some video and still pictures from up there. I don't think they'd let me do that now. Somehow the liability issues up there scrambling around. But I recovered this slide from 1994 when I did that work. And there are a lot of other projects we've done by being a Purdue in a small urban area. And my students have had either the pleasure or the ordeal of having to follow that. Okay, class. Finish this sentence. No man is a prophet in his own hometown or his own land. I changed it a little bit, on his own campus. 1987, this part of the civil building was being built, the addition, the new part. If you went outside this door, and you would see this monstrosity conglomeration of homemade traffic control devices. I can hardly stand to look at it. It is awful. They were just, but at least on the other side, so these things were over here at the end of these construction trailers. If you go this way and turn around and look at this picture, you'll see it says absolutely no passing, traffic control. I guess as if otherwise we didn't mean it, but now we really mean it because we said absolutely. And if you can see this set of arrows, can you see those from where you are? But 2-way in which country? Yeah, so if you follow that, you're going to have a head-on collision probably with somebody else. What's especially galling about this is inside this building, the old half of the civil building, there were at least 3 copies of the manual that would tell them how to do it correctly in terms of location and design, the MUTCD. Well, let's fast forward to last November. Bicycle marking suddenly showed up on campus. If you left this room, went out that door, you would have seen this, a Sharrow improperly used. So I've been just giving handouts to Purdue people saying, The proper way is not that way. Now you'll see a black blotch put over it to block it off. Go out here, turn left past physics, and you would have seen this. I think you do, well, I think they blocked this off. But if you have a Sharrow, you shouldn't have a bike lane and vice versa. It's either one or the other. And so no man is a prophet on his own campus. There are several people, we should be known to the administration, that know about bicycle markings and planning and so on. We've been ignored. So Kamaris mentioned the tech transportation. So I leave campus looking for respect. I took Harold Michaels' chairmanship of this committee because nobody else wanted to be chairman, so I get to run the committee. But it's law enforcement represented here from the county and the cities, city engineer West Lafayette and the county highway director, executive director of the Area Plan Commission. Some people escaped before we took this picture. People from NDOT, West Lafayette Police, City Bus, and the airport. But we do lots of stuff. And the main thing we do, well, the most important thing I think we do is allocate big bucks. When the President Obama's stimulus package was being spread around, we got $3.8 million, had a special meeting and decided who got what for what purpose. We put together something called the Transportation Improvement Program to put together a set of projects prioritized by time and by until we run out of money for each year. And the amazing thing is, as an academic, I used to go to these meetings and say, I've got this priority scheme, let's set up the key variables and we'll weight them and we'll come up with a priority scheme. And they said, as nicely as they could, would you please get out of the way? We're going to do this as friends and colleagues. And they actually do. They say, Dave, your project is farther along than mine, Jenny might say, and Dave gets his project moved up the list. And then they remember next year that Jenny had done the nice thing, and then Opal says, yeah, Jenny should go next. They actually put together this list involving millions of dollars by being nice to each other and being rational. So much for the things that Sam and I put in our textbooks. At this level anyway, it's more done by who is being reasonable for the better good. The other board I sit on is City Bus. I'm the chairman this year because it's my turn. But it's neat to have this blend of backgrounds on this board. Insurance, law, real estate, a high school teacher, city council, small business owner, I'm the professor, and the energy utility person. This is a good group to have as background for the various things we do. Now this is my big slide. Thanks to Stephanie Everett, I can go through and I'll bring in visuals and take them out, and she helped me with this one. So I'm going to go through some of the things that have happened since 1990 when I became a member of the board. Although I really shouldn't take credit for them, I watched them happen. The first one was adopting a nickname to replace GLPTC. My daughter played a major role in this as a 2-year-old, but it's too long a story to explain here. Maybe during a reception I can give you that information. So it now is City Bus. I think we're happy with that. Unlimited access. If you have Purdue ID, you can ride the bus for free anywhere in the system, not just on campus. We stole that idea for Fort Collins. It took us 5 years to convince Purdue it was a good idea. But I think everybody agrees it is a good idea. We joined high-tech era by enabling our buses to be tracked by satellite, automatic vehicle location it's called, and we can provide estimated time of departure information for passengers this way or on the web. So this is on the kiosk here. We also can have, if you walk onto one of our buses or leave the bus, look up above you as you enter, go through the threshold, and there are 2 little infrared beady eyes looking at you, counting you, either as boarding or leaving the bus. And we can do that by stop because we tie the satellite information to the count that happens right there as you enter or leave the bus. System is growing. It's more than doubled in the last 10 years. We had to build a separate new maintenance facility, a very nice facility to meet our maintenance needs and get back into the 21st century, I think. This one is pretty interesting. Cameras on the buses. It costs about $9,000 to outfit a bus with cameras, between 6 and 8 cameras on a bus. The very first week, we avoided a lawsuit by having these cameras on the buses. A woman drove into the side of our bus, and we looked at the video and saw that she was looking this way as she drove into the bus, and her lawyer called us a few days later and wanted to discuss a settlement. And with great glee, our general manager said, would you like to see the video? And I don't know if you ever came and saw it, but it saved a lawsuit or a settlement because it was clear that she was not even watching where she was going. She drove into the side of the bus. It also helps when the driver is having trouble with a high school kid getting out of hand. He says, you're on the watch. Look at these cameras up here. You're being videoed right now. Or if somebody loses something on the bus, we can go back and look and say, oh, that's where the person picked up the laptop that was left on the bus. And the driver usually knows who the passengers are in our system. And we go to that person's place of work, and this actually happened, recovered the cell phone or the laptop right there without a few hours, before a few hours elapse. So it's been a great system. The drivers, we thought they would hate it, but they usually love it because whenever there's an incident between driver and passenger, the driver usually is right, and this provides evidence to that extent. Or if there's a crash at an intersection. These are color cameras. We can tell if the light was red or green. So it's really a good system. Oh yeah, I forgot to tell you that you can see it this way, down the side of the bus, and so on. And I've used this for some projects on data collection, of course. In 2006, we made a big decision as a board to spend a lot more money on buses that were hybrids. This bus cost about $650,000 compared to about $400,000 for a diesel bus. Now, hybrid, the electric motor gets it started from a stop. It then goes to internal combustion for cruise. And then when it stops, it uses regenerative braking to convert the mechanical energy back into electrical, into the overhead batteries. 3.9 miles per gallon for diesel, 5.3 miles per gallon for hybrid. And it really was, it saves you fuel, it saves you emissions. But even so, it would really, if you did the cash flow analysis, it was not a good economic decision. But we thought this is the way we should probably express our concern about our operating environment. We painted the buses a different color, and it's been a big success, I think, in terms of public relations. More economy, just a good statement, even though if it wasn't purely an economic decision. We also have the ability, well, advertisers can wrap the bus for $1,250 for the first year and less the second and third years. But what they end up with is a rolling billboard. So instead of spending a lot of money to be at 18th and Main and sitting there on wherever the billboards are nowadays, this billboard goes all over the place. On campus, off campus, we try to circulate the bus around. So Dairy Queen actually has 2 buses. I saw them both today during my run that they are very happy with. But this is our mainstay, the red, white, and blue motif that one of our suppliers, Gillig, likes so much they've actually used it in their ads. They take the city bus part off, but they say this is their favorite design for a bus wrap, and they use that in their advertisements with our permission. Oh, but this is so popular, and this is the one that's so popular. We've put a limit on the number of wraps, the commercial billboard kind of thing, at 25%. We don't want to lose our branding of our system. Wind turbines. The neat thing about this is an undergraduate at Purdue who was also an intern at City Bus during his free time and took my class in transit, Raymond Mui, wrote a grant to the Greenhouse Gas Emission Reduction Program called TIGGER, and he got a $2 million grant for City Bus to build these 3 wind turbines. So we're pretty proud of that, and it is giving us some savings in power as a demonstration project. On the back of our old building, we needed more space to store vehicles, so we put the storage unit in. It has improved bus wash and fare box unloading capabilities, so we're pretty happy about that. And now we get back to passenger information. Double map. Until this year, or probably last year, we were able to, you can go online to MyRideWeb and put in your favorite bus stop and find out when the next bus is going to be departing that stop. That was web-based. Now we have a handheld device app called Double Map that allows you to track your individual buses as they go along the route. On your route, you can specify which route you want. And that really has been interesting. A lot of people have been excited about that. So it's just go to use your iPhone or smartphone and look for the Double Map app. It's free, and it's quite nice. Last year, we opened the City Bus Center, our transfer center. It used to be in front of Reilly Plaza, and buses were end to end. If the first bus wasn't ready to leave, nobody could leave. All the buses were stuck. And now we have instead, behind that, a sawtooth design. And I watched this bus pull out, the subway bus. It can make the left turn, crank the wheel around, and doesn't have to wait for the bus in front of it. And this has really improved our operations. Also, passengers can, without crossing traffic, go from one bus to the other, and every bus has its own designated location. So whatever you always know where your bus is going to be. So what's in the future? We are thinking about investing $4 million that we don't have, looking for funding for this, to put in compressed natural gas compressors and fueling station and buses. The more buses we can get that are going to use CNG, the more we can spread the cost, the capital cost, over the buses. So that's something we're considering now, trying to get funding for that. So that's my experience with GLPTC in the last 24 years. So research and discovery, finally research. I'm going to give you a sample of the projects I've been doing over the last few decades, and there'll be a few themes I saw emerging. One is my preoccupation with data. Another is my fondness for travel models, but it's tempered fondness. And I've gotten into an unfunded area involving behavior of bicyclists. My format will be very quickly what we did and what we found. But before I get there, I want to tell you that one thing I found was lasting relationships with my students. These are 3 students that are now doing great things in Taiwan, and they invited us over, Karen and me, over to Taiwan 2 or 3 summers ago, and we had a great time over there. And this is the kind of thing I really cherish as a result of the project. Maybe not a publication only, but some good research findings, but also ongoing relationships with students that I've worked with. Okay, a few examples. Weigh in motion. INDOT has at the time had 43 stations that would attempt to weigh vehicles as they crossed the sensors. These are load cells. There's also bending plate and piezoelectric, and they all take this pressure and convert it into a weight, a loading, and also track the vehicle pattern and classify the vehicles. So INDOT said, we are not quite sure we know the quality of our data. Would you help us check it out and fix it if we have to? So we found 3 things. We found that the external appearance of the data file may be misleading, which will give you an example. Calibration drift may be hard to detect, and change is hard, unfortunately. So this is the kind of data summary you get from one of the stations. You'll get lane 1 and lane 3, and the classification. This is the class 9, your familiar 18-wheeler, the semi-trailers. If you can't classify the vehicle, it goes in class 0. But the poor person who would be expected to manage these 43 telemetric stations, he was expected to check the data out. It would take him more than 1/2 day to do this by looking at this kind of data for every one of the 43, assuming he had made sure that the data had come in. If it didn't come in automatically at 3 a.m., he'd have to pull the station and get that as a first step. So this is the kind of thing we found when we checked the data he had stored over the past couple of years. You'd have fairly reasonable behavior of an average class 9 vehicle, around 60,000 gross vehicle weight for the whole vehicle, having measured the axles and consolidated things. And then suddenly it went down to 0 for a couple days. Well, he didn't catch that because he let this get stored. And we said, well, that's probably not a good thing, unless there's a reason for it. Was there a crash? Was there construction? Or that sensor wasn't you didn't have access to it? And it happened over and over here, erratic stuff, zeros. This is something you'd like to at least either avoid or explain. Another problem was, including this, is that we had a nice 60,000 pattern, and then it dropped to 35,000. We think that the algorithm that converted the sensor loadings into a gross vehicle weight somehow had gotten out of whack, or something somewhere along the line in the multi-step process. So what we did was develop historical data for each station and do some plots. And this was the end result of doing a 6-step process for those 43 stations. We timed it at 45 minutes instead of more than half a day. We said this would give you a chance to look for outliers wherever your daily point was. And you could do this on a weekly or monthly basis, station by station. What is the average range of values? And this may be the 1 standard deviation each way, or whatever we've decided. That this is a problem. This is not a problem. This is not a problem. So at a glance, having invested 45 minutes in setting this up, you could then say, let me check more why this guy is so out of range, or this one is so out of range. So these are real examples. So we worked with the INDOT people, especially the guy who was the checker, and he seemed satisfied and competent to do this. And a few months later, we found that he had given up on this. he was more content to have the old way. In his 45 minutes, he could check it out and get rid of it, and he was looking at file sizes that may have had all zeros in them, and it looked like it had non-zeros in them. So again, no respect. But let me switch to the opposite, where we did get some respect and have an impact, traffic impact studies. In the early 90s, I think Kamarsh and I got a call. They said that the two permit guys in INDOT were getting tired of having consultants call on behalf of developers saying, we want our driveway permits so we can have access to the state highway. And they wanted them real close to signalized intersections, or they're in bad locations in terms of crossing the median movements. So Matt and Bob were really getting upset. So they called me and said, can you do something about this? So I went to the first meeting we'd set up, consultants on my left, Matt and Bob from INDOT on my right, and I said, there's something we can do. And Matt and Bob said, all we're asking for is advance notice. As soon as you get the idea of putting a shopping center or a subdivision in, give us a heads up and we can work with you. And the consultant said, all we're asking for is some guidance as to what will be expected of us once we do that. So we felt a flow chart coming, and there it is, that you can, depending on what the status of the situation is it a back of the envelope calculation, is it a memo of understanding, or is it a full-fledged traffic impact analysis? And this became the basis of a paper that was published and used by a lot of states to follow what Indiana was doing. We did some work on Bayesian updating of national and local data, and we also did some things we did a pass-by survey at Eastway Plaza. That results were so good we didn't believe them. So we went to Indianapolis and did it again. We got great results as well. So anyway, we wrote the technical report and then a guide to applicants so the consultants knew what was expected of them. The reviewers said, give us a guide that tells us what the state of the practice or standard practice is, and we're all happy, and they were. And then 15 years later, somebody happened to mention to me about a traffic impact guide that I had written. I said, are you sure? He said, yeah. I said, would you send it to me? And he did. It was Hadi Amin. He sent me this. And sure enough, they were still using it 15 years later, the guide, the applicant's guide in this case. And a few years after that, well, in fact, 2011, they called and they said, you know, that was a great guide, but the world has changed. Would you do an update, which we just finished last year, and Jerry Bollinger was the student there. So update, that made me feel good. It kind of made me feel better than when I did the Way in Motion study, they actually were using the stuff. This one I'll go through quickly because it would take 5 weeks to go through this part, the 4-step process after land use. What we found here is that INDOT said, again, data. We're trying to run our statewide model, but we think the garbage coming in is affecting the garbage coming out. So could you help us here? And we found, by doing some sensitivity analysis, the most important input in the model would be employment data. And if you look at the next line, the hardest data to get are employment data. So this reinforced this misgiving or this feeling of unease about the process, but we knew we had isolated and confirmed that problem. But in the process, we talked to people who knew people who knew people and found that there are some data sources that INDOT and I did not know about that were very helpful in trying to update what employment data we had. And I've used this report a lot in classroom and subsequent research in terms of the data that are required and the models that are available to us. This one is kind of interesting to me anyway. Brian Guy in 2005 got assigned to this project where we were looking for ways in which you could collect data to establish origin-destination tables, especially through tables. If somebody enters your study area at this point, they have all these different places they could go, or they could just stop to end their trip in the middle of the study area. So Brian, among other things, set up video equipment to capture license plates, and he worked on all possible combinations of things I'll tell you in a minute, and then went ahead and, having done that, said, let's look at the data requirements. If we miss some matches somewhere, at what point do we have to give up and start over? Things like that. So our findings were, don't trust the pros, I'll explain that, and more than 10,000 people care. So this is the 10,000 people part. The EPUB system, some of you are familiar with this. This is the one from last month where it says I've had over 10,000 hits. 208 of those were this last month, and 199 of those 208 were Brian Guy's project. So this is getting a lot of readership, and if you don't believe me, you can write this down and check out that URL for that display. So Brian did things like this. He said, let me consider the angle with respect to the center line of the video camera that is best. And he found it was roughly 30 degrees is the best. Yeah. This way it's too big an angle. This way it's too small an angle with the parallel. And he did things like that. And along with all these other things, this is just one subsection of his report that talked about all the combinations of things he did in terms of lighting conditions and focus and shutter speed and all this. And it really is a good piece of work. I didn't realize how good it was until these thousands of people started downloading it. So good for him. This is not a pro. This is a student who used a camera I had begged, borrowed or stolen to get the Logansport area encircled with cameras watching license plates go by, entering or leaving the Logansport area. So when I got to this guy, I double or triple checked everything he had done. Camera angle, shutter speed, focal length, all this stuff. And life was good. Then I went to the pros I had hired from Purdue's audiovisual section, and for some reason I was too timid to check their work. I figured they knew what the specifications were, they knew the purpose of this. I'm not going to look through their camera viewfinder and check them out. That would be kind of rude. Well, guess which sites were done the poorest? When you have a missing, if all you have is blurred images here and you can't read a single license plate, you have a huge hole in your data. How can you take somebody entering here and see if they left the study area here? You can't do it because there's no ending point for those trips. So we had to do a lot of data gymnastics to get that halfway decent because we had holes wherever the professionals were. We had useless videos. So big lesson learned there. Mary Marchuk came along and did another origin destination study, try to do this as quickly as possible. INDOT, every time they run their statewide model, it takes an hour and a half. And what they had been doing up until they asked us to do this project was, if you had an interest in Greensburg and how many people are going through that study area, like the Logansport case, you would draw a polygon around Greensburg and run the statewide model and then keep track of how many trips crossed the Greensburg cordon line. We had one person in Indiana who knew how to do that well, and then she left, went back to Egypt. So they said, we're in a fix here. So Mary learned how to do it, and she did it for all kinds of different areas, including 2 areas that we had otherwise we had data for. And we developed something called Cleverly Treble through route estimation by Logit. And her idea was a clever one. She said, let's consider a driver coming in from the west. The driver has all these choices to make. Where should I leave the study area, or should I stay inside the study area? And it's a choice model. Whether it's toothpaste or a destination, it's a choice model. And she built some nice simple functions, tested them against 2 other competing methods. We were usually better than those methods. It was a good substitute for the sub-area analysis that we could no longer do because Seema Alvey went back to Egypt. And we had some great results. The trouble was the equation is too simple. We got it in a proceedings at TRB, but nobody will publish this because it's too simple. So we're thinking about making it more complicated and then submitting it again. But it really does work well. We tried it after the project was over. There was a case of should they build a second bypass around Mount Vernon to supplement this one. We did our analysis, did the other 3 versions, and ours was more reasonable. The results are more reasonable. And we had a table like this that we could spend some time on, but we won't. OK. INDOT, for one time that I know of, did a bicycle-related project and let me do it. Mike Klobuchar was my student, and we found there were 2 parts to the project. One was analyze crash data, and the other part was explain how bicyclists behave as much as you can, and we had to develop some procedures there. We found 2 things that were interesting. On the average, 11 people per year die in Indiana as bicyclists. So 11 is kind of the magic number with very little variation. And we found that the most dangerous spot, given that small sample size for maybe 5 years, is where a bicyclist rides on a sidewalk in front of a busy driveway, such as leaving a shopping center, a supermarket, or something. That was disproportionately high, and you don't have to have this visual obstruction here. It just tends to be a bad place to have those 2 people cross. The other thing was people in their 40s tend to have more bicycle crashes than people in their 30s or 50s for some reason. And that was very consistent. The other thing was we put together on the route choice side, we said, you know, it makes sense. Bicyclists tend to minimize their length of a trip unless they're just going out for a pleasure ride. And they also want to minimize risk. So let's just multiply those 2 numbers together. length in miles and risk in something called a bicycle compatibility index on a scale of 1 to 5. So let's just multiply those together, see how that works. We tried it on West Lafayette's presumed origin destination pattern of bicyclists near campus and so on. It looked pretty good. We submitted it to TRB thinking that would get some good feedback as they reject the paper, but they accepted it. They accepted the paper, so that was pretty cool. And this is what Mike Klobuchar put together for his thesis defense. He said, for example, class, we're going to have a length in miles and a BCI representing risk. Both, the bigger the number, the worse it is. So let's just multiply those together. Can you do that? 0.5 times 3.8. Everybody got the answer? All right. 1.9. We called it the safe length then. We should call it the risk length now. So let's see what happens. If you sum up those link by link safe lengths, this is the way the bicyclist would go to get from 1 to 6 because it minimizes the sum of those products, the risk times length. And it got published, so we're happy about that. More about that in a minute. I'm a runner, maybe more a jogger now. One of my routes is to leave Lambert and go up Northwestern Avenue. And Mackey's on my left, and then the indoor practice facility is on the left. And more often than not, or quite often, a bicyclist comes at me on the sidewalk. And I'm thinking, why is the bicyclist on the sidewalk instead of playing in the traffic? Well, the answer is pretty obvious. This is a feeling of discomfort or a feeling unsafe. So we did a study, augmented by some interviews at bike racks about how people got to the bike rack from their point of origin, and collected a lot of hundreds of bicyclists in the database. And we found that a bike lane painted here would not be enough. And this seems like a simple issue, but when you talk about bicyclists and their operating environment, bicyclists don't like to go past parked cars. They don't like to be on a busy street, but if there's a parked cars on a residential street, that's okay. So we had to do some statistical analysis to try to compensate for the fact that cars are bad when parked, cars are bad when moving, but cars when they're parked on a street with very few moving cars is okay. So, and also the allure of a sidewalk is irresistible to some bicyclists. So Lei Kang came around, took that same data set, refined it, massaged it somewhat, and did, whoops, I don't want to show that right away because that's something separate. And he came up with similar results, more statistically supported. High traffic volumes are avoided. Wide sidewalks are irresistible a lot of the time. And if you invest in a bike lane, you better be sure about it. Just don't paint a line and expect bicyclists to get off the sidewalk and move into the street. And we have the data and the analysis to support it. Now, if you have room, do what Indianapolis did on the Heritage Trail, right? The bicycles on this side of the sidewalk, pedestrians on this side of the sidewalk. A lot of European cities do this. And I found a new place while running today on State Street that does this on the south side of State Street between McCormick Road and Martin Jiski Drive. They have now a bike lane next to the sidewalk. Remember that Klobuchar safe length simple equation, risk times length? Well, Lei took it and did a little bit more mathematical manipulation and found we have an equation that's a little less simple, and this got published too, so in the Journal of Transportation. So a lot of research I've done. This is the last 10 years, not since second grade, but in the last, well, maybe more like last 6 years. A lot of variation there in things I'm doing. A lot of them quite enjoyable. A lot of good students who we've been working with. But let me go to the service examples, some more service examples. Only one I'll talk about. I've been on every CE head search committee since I've been here. The first one was the Great Marathon with Dean Yang for 30 months, 90 meetings. I know because I wrote every one down. And then the last two, we incorporated something that I thought was really good. Instead of the year 2000, we put together a dream sheet. You know, you put down the attributes you'd like to see in a head. No person on the face of the earth can match those requirements. So we put it on a sheet of pink paper and laughed at it in the year 2000. In 2005, I said, wait a minute, I teach something called nominal group process as a qualitative method in CE 512. Let's get the staff, and a member of the committee said, hey, that's good, let's ask questions. Let's get questions from these constituents, these stakeholders, questions we should ask the finalists for the role of head of civil engineering. So nominal group process is a way in which you draw out of even the most timid person, doesn't count faculty, but timid people who then say, hey, I have an idea. You write it down and you process it. And it really worked well in 2005 and also 2011 and 12. We got a good set of questions, and you can, I think you can probably believe this. The staff questions are quite different from the student questions, which are quite different from the faculty questions when you're going to ask these of the candidates. And it really helped us, the committee, the head search committee, in representing the various constituencies. Okay, so as you know, nobody can do this kind of stuff I've been messing with over the years by myself. I've had a great support team, colleagues and students and so on. Let me just pick on point out two people. One is Kumar Sinha, my mentor and friend. We have a nice mentoring program now, more formal. Back then we didn't have anything formal, but sometime in 1980 I wandered into Kumar's office. He said, "Sit down, I have to talk to you." And he gave me about a 20-minute talk about what I should do to get my career headed in the right direction. And I remember three things. I hope I don't have a Rick Perry moment here, but I think I have three things I remember. One was he said, you need to put together a nice publication list, but don't do it to the exclusion of a balanced portfolio. So do the other things as well, but establish a nice research program. Number two, get your professional engineering license, because that would probably satisfy several of the people on the promotions committee. And number three, you said, some people like Purdue, some people don't like Purdue, but, you remember what you said? You'll probably meet your wife here. And 6 months later, I met Karen here. She is my wife and friend. I don't tell her enough how much I appreciate her. She has her own PhD, so she probably understands what I'm going through from time to time. So I never can tell her enough how much I appreciate her and her support in this experience I've had since 1980. So thank you, Karen. So I think we've left a few minutes. So what should we do with the rest of our time? This is my last slide in the presentation. So if you have any urge to have a conversation, we could do it now or do it in the reception. But thank you for your attention.
We'll give you a
Oh, thanks. Antonio, you have a question?
Not yet.
Okay, good. Okay. I went to his talk, so he had to come to mine. So.
What would you tell young person coming how that person should conduct his or her career in research, in teaching, in community service? What would you tell that person? We have an obvious idea.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Well, you know,
Or anywhere.
and I didn't really plan the way this happened to have so much community activity, but I think I was just drawn to that because even my research, I have students who are doing this exotic statistical analysis, and I'll ask to lay, well, how do we tell the city engineer how to use this research? And he looks at me and says, isn't this exotic analysis enough? I'll say, no, I think I'd like to know how to use it in real life. So that's kind of my inclination, but others don't have to do that. I think they can follow their own way of contributing. Yeah, so I guess kind of follow what you think is, with an expectation or a realization of what it takes to succeed in this business. You gave me very good advice. Put together a good research record, leading to publications, but that shouldn't be everything that you do. So I don't know if I have any magic words for Nadia or anybody else, but yeah.
Well,
Vince.
I'd add one to what you've said there, and that is to do it with enthusiasm, which
Yeah.
you obviously do, and that makes a big difference.
Yeah, and I'm really proud of my colleagues in civil engineering because I put heart and soul into teaching, but I'm pretty much rated an average professor in terms of teaching. And I say if I'm average, then I think I'm doing a pretty good job, I think. Think about these people who are doing such a great job. But I do get high marks in enthusiasm. I guess if not enough higher marks in other areas. But you're right, it's something you have to have a passion for. I can't imagine doing anything else. Even my father's wondering what I'm doing. Used to wonder what I do with the rest of my time.
So, John,
Yeah.
talking about fathers, we're still struggling with mine. Have you ever explained to your father what you do with the rest
Well,
of
you try.
the hours a week that you're not teaching?
Well, my family is, yeah, he's no longer alive, but I did my best to explain. I don't think it got through to him. He was a director of public relations, so he kept his days full of activity doing what he did in the white-collar job. But my family is one that we used to tease each other. You know, I'm a runner. I used to enter these races with 5,000 runners in Grand Rapids, Michigan, for instance, and we were there for Mother's Day weekend. And I'd finish in the top 20%, and my sister said, I don't know why you run. You never win. So that's the kind of family I grew up in. You sort of have to put up with the jabs that come with it. So I think my father probably eventually figured it out, but.
So John, another question. Since you talk about, more technically, a lot about things that happen at the local, that Lafayette, are there any scale effects that you've noticed going from, I don't know, you talk about exits at the mall with bikes, you talk about intersections, and then you talk also about the state. I'm curious, are there any issues with scale?
I think that's a good question. I think most of the things I'm thinking about as you ask the question are not scalable. We're talking about the bicycle analysis. We're talking about intersections and so on. Even the statewide model and the regional transportation planning models or development models, they have the same procedures and the same philosophy, but they don't scale well. You have to, for instance, we have something like 1,000. We have 1,000 zones in the statewide model now, and we have 200 zones in the local model, and they don't map well on each other. So the statewide model, you can't have too many zones in the statewide model. It would never finish running, but you have to have some kind of fineness in there. So the philosophy is the same, but it's just not take the zones that you have in Lafayette area and divide and aggregate them, something like that. So I think you pretty much have to start afresh. There are some things that relate well as far as we did some research on interjurisdictional relationships. And that, I think, does the lessons you learn there, whether it's state to state or state to county or county to city, those things, I think, are transferable. But a lot of this isn't that I can see. You kind of have to approach it with a fresh set of eyes. Yeah.
John, there's been a lot of talk on campus about bicycles in the last 6 months or a year or so. Are they going to get that straightened out?
Well, they let me talk to the consultant. See, I said, no man is a prophet. The day we had, in February, we had a snow day. I had a 9 o'clock meeting with the consultants. They hired consultants from Indianapolis and Washington, D.C. to do the campus master plan that several of us could do, but they had to hire people out of town. So I made sure I got to that meeting. I fought through the snowstorm, and the consultants are already in town. They had to show up. So I talked to them for an hour, and I brought a short presentation of all the things that were bad and some of the things that were good about campus. And I said, please do it right the third time, because we've done it twice, and it's been a disaster. But one time was, they had a bike path going up to Hovde Hall from this direction, and it then couldn't go in front of Hovde Hall because that would offend somebody, so they put it around the back. So it looked like, I said in this meeting, it looked like the arrow that goes to your head, You come to Hovde Hall, go around and back the other way. I said, why did you do that? Well, they said we weren't allowed to put the bike path where it belonged. It had to go behind Hovde Hall because they didn't want bicyclists at the foot of the Hovde steps. I said, you got to stop thinking that way. This has to be functional, because bicyclists aren't going to say, oh, I have to turn right here. They're going to go straight. So there has to be a sort of a compromise. You have to meet the bicyclists where they are. Don't turn them loose, because a lot of them are reckless, but you have to keep this in mind. So they did let me talk for an hour to the consultants, and I gave them handouts and papers I had written and so on. And one of them actually sent me a letter back, said she would, an email said she's reading the papers now. So, yeah.
John, are we ever going to get a high-speed train?
Not here. Maybe on the East Coast. California. No, I don't say not for a long time. Illinois, which is one of the worst states in the worst fiscal condition, said, well, let's do it, from Chicago to St. Louis, and they're having problems. California, which is the other state in the bottom two fiscally, said, let's do it, and they're having a heck of a problem there. The estimated cost have more than doubled since the voters of the state voted for a bond issue to spend money on the thing, and it's really having problems. So if those states, well, they're probably the worst two cases that you could possibly consider. They don't mind spending somebody else's money until they run out of it, and they can't get it done. So I'd say the best place to put it would be in the East Coast, where we actually have an established ridership. I'd love to see it here, but we're so far from. We have a 20% recovery ratio. For every $20 you spend on a ticket, 80% is funded by somebody else, the taxpayer. So until we get a ridership, now there's something called elasticity, where if you increase the frequency, you might have more riders. But let's say you have 2 trains a day. Will you get twice the ridership? Probably not, but you'll have twice the cost. So you'll be going further and further down. So don't tell anybody I'm saying this because I have a lot of people who will be angry about this, but I think I'm being realistic. So you have to start in some place where we have the established ridership on the East Coast. Our high-speed rail, a cell on the East Coast, is really not high-speed rail. It does get up to 75 miles an hour in some places, but it has to slow down for bad tracks. So there's a lot of work that has to be done. So it'll be fun, but I don't see it happening. So. But Nadia has a student working on this, right? So what does she say? What does Dimitra say?
Well, she's working more commuter rail from Chicago to Indianapolis that can be a part of the high-speed rail design.
Okay. We did a study in 560 a couple of years ago, taking secondary data, and we figured it would take $9 billion to put a system in from Chicago to Louisville and branching off to Cincinnati. $9 billion just for that system. And what was President Obama's initiative for high-speed rail for the whole United States? $9 billion. So I said, I'll take it all and we'll build a system for Indiana, but there's nothing left for anybody else. And that was a nationwide initiative, $9 billion. So.
Maybe Florida.
Could be, yeah. That's been off and on depending who's governor. Yeah.
They're reviving. Some parts of Texas and California.
Okay.
So, thank you.
All right. Thank you.